you're right. We have to get big picture here. And you have a lot of problems with Trump. I have fewer because I see him as coming from behind against a collection of interests that goes back decades and which has so many advantages that I'd like to see them kicked in the shins in all kinds of ways, just to see if it's possible for this country to change.
Well, that's true. Mm-hmm.
But on the economy, this is how I see it. My son asked me, what do I think of these tariffs the other day? And I try to give him as honest an answer as I can. It's not an informed answer because I'm not a Pulitzer Prize winning, seer like Thomas Friedman. But, it would be this. Charlie, my son, listen, you can have corporate profits or you can have high wages to a certain extent. You can have both, but the corporate profits are going to be lower if the wages are higher. Okay. And so it's a shift of money from, as they used to say, Wall Street to Main Street. Now, It used to be a truism on the left that we're against Wall Street and we're for Main Street. But here's what's happened to Main Street. Main Street has suffered lower wages, lower standards of living, lower levels of things like life expectancy and other tiny things like that, due to the fact that their jobs have gone away and the wages of the jobs that have remained have plunged, and the security of the jobs that remain doesn't exist. It's an app. Are you on the app?
Yeah, are you on OnlyFans? That's the most secure job in America, until you hit a certain age.
Right. So app-based employment combined with things like OxyContin and the trauma from our wars that we just keep cycling our working class through abroad and so on, have left a denuded and demoralized America, which is really expensive. It's a really expensive America. Stuff at Target may cost less because it's being manufactured in China, but the services to help the mentally ill, to house the homeless, to keep the crime rates down, to do everything else that comes with a degenerating society are really high. So we just moved the cost of those. Okay, we had $10 mittens. Now they're $5 mittens and they come from China. We saved $5. Oh, no, we didn't actually. Now they're actually $12 mittens because included in the cost of them is they only last a month. So they fill up our landfills.
And we there's no job for making them in here anymore.
There's no job for making them. So, there's no security for the families. You're losing your homes to corporate buyers like BlackRock because if you can't afford them, BlackRock still can. And if you still want one, you're bidding against them. Okay. So did those cheap mittens come out to a $5 savings? Or do they really now cost $30 in total cost? It would be I would submit that they may not cost 30, but they cost a lot. And they cost a lot in morale. They cost a lot in life expectancy. They cost a lot in environmental problems, frankly. And they cost a lot in the demoralization that comes of crappy stuff at Target falling apart on the way home from Target. But for money people like Thomas Friedman, where it's all just a sort of glowing river of digits in the sky and wealth flows and so on, it looks pretty good. Except, is the United States that wealthy? Because last time I checked, we're negative wealthy, like way negative wealthy. In fact, we're paying more interest on our lack of wealth that we have to borrow to cover than we are on even the people in the streets who are the result of not having jobs. Like, it's called a downward spiral, dude. And an attempt to arrest it using some forms of traditional, what you might even call protectionism, is warranted if you look outside. That's how I see it.
Yeah, and,
because the American worker is now delivering frickin' Chinese food from people who can only afford to produce Chinese food by having their whole family work secretly, including the 8-year-old.
And we were supposed to say thank you for that. Thank you for making Akron a wasteland.
Akron, where my entire family comes from. Look at this hat. I'm feeling like Pete Seeger by the end of this thing. I really am. I feel like I should pick up a freaking guitar or Clifford
This
Odets.
land was your land. Yep.
Yeah. Because in Akron, Ohio, where I used to go as a kid to see my grandpa and grandma and my cousins, and where they all still live, those that are still alive, the difference between Firestone, Goodyear, BF Goodrich plants and, the look of the town and the feel of the town in 1970, even 1972, which wasn't a great year for anybody. And now it's shocking. Now what you've got is LeBron James sponsoring a high school, trying to help kids, read and function in society. That's the brilliant beacon of Akron, Ohio now.
And even that is a Chinese-sponsored enterprise, ultimately, yes, because the NBA is massively subsidized by China.
When I was a kid and you turned on the news, you heard names like Walter Reuter and George Meany and Jimmy Hoffa. You know who those were? Labor leaders. America, how many labor leaders can you name right now?
How many can you name who you don't suspect of being in bed with the very party that did all this shit? And this is the problem that I always had with Democrats going back to the 2004. They had some people who really ran for high office back then who were actual labor leaders, who were actually pro-labor, but they always, the unions back then always backed people like John Kerry or Hillary Clinton, who signed off on NAFTA and most favored nation trading status for China and all these other things that decimated American workers. So they're not a labor party. Nobody's a labor party. And, this moment that we're talking about where that was missed, where the populist left, populist right could have recognized their own common interests and maybe come up with something.
But Matt, let me submit something.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't missed. It's happening right now. And once again, it's being prevented from happening because whatever else you might think of Donald Trump or MAGA or J.D. Vance or whoever, there is an attempt and there was an attempt at the very Republican convention we went to, at which a Teamsters president spoke, to start to at least create or formalize this coalition. And I can tell you as a reporter for a fact who knows some of the principles in our government, that will go on. That will continue. It is a long-term goal of this group who is now at the top of the executive to somehow bring that coalition into a dynamic, healthy state rather than let them be constantly pitted against one another, usually using cultural issues.
And pitted against one another by a cartel of unaccountable international interests who, for whom this formula is basically flawless, right?
And dude, remember, back in 2011 when Nader and Buchanan are having that conversation, there was one element that hadn't yet come to the fore, and that was really, massive immigration into the United States, which, as I said the other week, I see as a direct subsidy of American corporate power, because it basically allows them to employ people at less than living wages, and then the government makes up for the shortfall in benefits to those workers, housing benefits, food benefits, and so on, freezing out the person who, formerly had that job at a higher wage.
And vilifying that person
and then vilifying them as bad people. So now the squeeze play isn't just cheap foreign labor, but it's also cheap labor that has been imported to the United States and
Europe.
And the people who are caught in that bind, the people of Newton, Iowa, which is my favorite example of all this because it's where Maytag and other appliances used to be made. Those people are still SOL, and they're still getting shorter and shorter in their lifespans and in their life expectancies. And they are, but what's new is that the left, instead of championing them, instead of them being the out of the unemployed Rosie the Riveter type who needs to, be celebrated and needs to be helped and brought back, they're being treated as people who need to be pounded down deeper into the dust because they're not listening to NPR and they're not, they don't have the attitudes culturally towards certain movements, gender and sexual liberation movements that they need to have. Bertolt Brecht said, the famous communist Marxist playwright said something like, whatever second, bread first, and in those towns, bread first rules. You can enlighten them about all the issues of, human identity that you think are paramount once they can buy a house again.